Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome as you're trickling in. We'll give people a few seconds to enter and then get right to the content. All right. Hello again. Thank you so much for spending part of your Wednesday with us. I know people are still trickling in, but we'll get started to make the most of the hour that we have together. My name is Kyler Blodgett. I'm a state and local policy analyst here at PeopleForBikes, and I'm so glad that you're joining us for our November segment of our monthly industry webinar series. For those of you who joined us before, welcome back. This month's conversation will be about sharing learnings about the rise in e-bike incentive programs across the nation. And we're so lucky to be joined by three fantastic experts we will meet in just one second. We host these webinars monthly, and just as an aside, this one had the most registrants of anyone we've hosted in 2022 so far. We have about 250 folks interested in coming today. So this is a hot topic. We're glad that you're here for it. You're, of course, welcome to take notes, but we will be sending out a recording and a copy of the slides and a few other resources to everyone who registered today. We will have an hour together. The first 45 minutes is presentation, and the final 15 is open audience Q&A. So please do use that Q&A feature in the bottom of your screen. I am glad to introduce our panelists, who will be our expert folks on the call this morning. We invited them with a great deal of care, knowing that there's lots of sort of variations of these programs across the country. We'll have Kate Rosen, a sustainable transportation advocate coming out of Connecticut, to talk about that instrumental advocacy perspective in moving a program from concept to legislative reality. We'll have Mike Salisbury from Denver, the city and county is their transportation energy lead, to talk about real-time lessons learned handling what you probably all heard about as a surge in local demand, and handling tiered income amounts and an innovative approach to working with local retailers for these incentives. And finally, Patrick Murphy from the Vermont DOT. He's their sustainability and innovation project manager, to speak on what's widely seen as the first entry-level program in the country open to the general public, first funded in 2021, and their approach to how it grew out of a lot of work with local advocacy groups and service providers across the state. So we'll take a look at our agenda and set the foundation for a few quick minutes before jumping to these fine folks. We'll have a 5 minutes, first we'll lay some foundation very quickly around why electric bicycles, why are we here talking about incentives, before giving each panelist 5 minutes to speak high level about the program that they're involved with, lessons learned, insights from that. We'll have about 15 minutes prepared, moderated questions, and then that Q&A feature. And I see questions are already coming in. Thank you for being a very engaged audience. We'll have 15 minutes for that at the end of the call. So we're assuming that you joined the call because you are already sold on e-bikes and want to figure out how to bring them to a wider audience. Even so, I wanted to lay the foundation briefly to talk about why e-bikes are changing the game and give some landscape around incentives in the United States right now, so that we can get that out of the way and our panelists can focus on their unique experience and tips instead of this kind of global foundation and background. So for a variety of reasons, e-bikes really are changing the game when it comes to micromobility and access. On the climate side, you probably are familiar with the research around their contributing to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. You probably saw the most recent research coming out of Atlanta associating decreases in congestion with the prevalence of e-bikes and e-scooters. In terms of social equity, for a variety of reasons, these machines reduce some of the typical barriers to biking that we've seen, whether it's making navigating hills easier, opportunities for delivery workers as a livelihood, adaptive riders, or simply people that want to string together trips or carry children on their bikes, which we know falls often along gender lines. E-bikes are changing what it means to use a bike as a viable means of transportation. And the sales numbers don't lie that you see on the slide. These are popular. The sales have tripled in the past couple of years, outpacing electric vehicles. And even though they're much cheaper to buy and maintain than a car, it's still a high price for a lot of folks. And that leads us to government-backed incentive programs, which is what you're all here today to learn about. PeopleForBikes has been active in this space this year, especially. There have been 7 state-level programs we've been involved in trying to help shape and usher along to fruition. And the numbers that you're seeing on the screen don't even include the 40 other programs that are offered by power districts, advocacy groups, nonprofits across the country. We are expecting several new state legislatures to consider bills to establish these programs in the upcoming legislative session in the springtime. So this is a policy space that's moving very quickly. But with all of this innovation, and types of new programs, the best answers to these questions at the bottom of the slide really vary from place to place. And we, as a community who cares about making the service as accessible and robust as possible, need to be in the habit of sharing knowledge and sharing best practices with one another. So that's what we're hoping to be doing here today. Just a brief word from me about what PeopleForBikes is up to in this space. We have been engaging actively to help make these programs as robust as possible in recent years, and we stand as a resource to every one of you, all the 100 folks that are here on the call today. For our government affairs team expertise, we have a policy team working at the federal, state, and local level. We have a robust action alerts program to support advocacy efforts to how to help mobilize voters and communications to public officials. We have several education resources. You'll be getting some of those later in the call, including these webinars. So please keep attending these. And we're tracking these policies nationally in terms of tax credits and other sort of e-bike incentives, as well as, of course, the dozens at the state and local level. And we also, taking a little bit of a different slice of things, we have a staff member who's fully dedicated to making sure that if you're an employer, you can help incentivize ridership among your employees, whether it's through purchase incentives, sort of financial reimbursements. And so we're happy to talk with you about making those programs a reality to encourage ridership as much as possible. With that, and then I'm going to be happy to pass it off to Kate to talk about the Connecticut side of things. There's a lot of information in quite small font on this slide. So it's really meant as a resource for you to look as you're looking at the deck after the call to see these programs side by side. We wanted to make sure that you had some high level information around the start dates, Denver being the earliest, early this year, launching to the public, Vermont coming this summer, and Connecticut coming early next year. And you can see the sort of side by side of the way that these 3 programs have approached the income tiers to make sure that this is accessible to people who probably would have a hard time otherwise purchasing an e-bike. So some of the speakers will go into this more in depth in their portion, but I just wanted to make sure you knew that you'll have this information after the call to understand these programs more in depth. And with that, hopefully it's enough from me. Really glad you're here, and let me pass it to Kate to talk about the Connecticut program.
Hi, so I want to thank PeopleForBikes for hosting this event today. I'm going to be talking about e-bike incentives from the advocacy perspective. Connecticut's e-bike incentives came after 2 years of legislative effort. The funding mechanism for Connecticut is a previously existing electric vehicle rebate program. E-bikes were not eligible under that program, which is why we sought to fix that legislatively. We started in 2021 with a study bill, which unfortunately did not make it to the Senate for a final vote. We came back in 2022. The idea of e-bike incentives at that point were no longer new, and they were included in a larger bill with a lot of other popular climate elements that we passed in May of this year. Next slide, Kyler. So one of the biggest hurdles to incentive program is obviously getting buy-in. And one of the things that we identified in this was buy-in meant getting people on the actual bikes. So we put together an e-bike demo event, and it was really specifically geared to and focused on legislators in the state of Connecticut. We did get a fair amount of community members, which is always an amazing bonus. It was hugely successful. The 2 people in the picture in the bottom are 2 of our legislative champions, Senator Will Haskell and Senator Christine Cohen. The big change was that from 2021 to 2022, we went from 8 co-sponsors to 76. We made a big, loud deal whenever we picked up a new co-sponsor. And at the e-bike demo event, we took tons of pictures of smiling, happy legislators on bikes. And my favorite video maybe ever is the House Majority Leader screeching in and pulling like a sideways skid onto grass on the bike. And obviously he very much supported and voted for the bill. Next slide. So other tools that we successfully utilized were just simple things like quote graphics, like the image on the right there. We highlighted the e-bike portion of the bill within the larger context. And so there were obviously other popular elements that would have drawn people in who might not have seen or heard about the e-bike incentive. So obviously electric school buses were very popular here, and for transportation folks, updating signalization was also another one. On the left is a guide that we created for residents. We as advocates felt very strongly that to create a strong and robust advocacy class, you need to give them the tools to be able to be successful now, but to also use them in the future for other efforts. And so we gave them, prompts every step of the way. We wanted to move away from a template format in terms of how they were interacting with their legislators. And so our guides included a variety of different prompts for individuals to pick from based on what they were the most passionate about in terms of e-bike adoption. And then next slide. So the bill passed and was signed into law by Governor Lamont on May 10th of this year. The program is currently being built by Connecticut's Department of Energy and Environment and the Air Rights Bureau. It is intended to prioritize residents of Connecticut who live in the communities most impacted by the effects of climate change and environmental racism that's happened over many, many years. We also have a focus on low-income individuals. The voucher amount, as you can see on this slide, is at least $500. For people who live in those communities or are income qualified, it would be up to $1,000. And as the slide a few ago said, we in Connecticut, I believe, expect that this will launch in Q1 of next year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we're excited to hear more about Connecticut once we get to the question and answer portion. Mike, can I pass it over to you to talk briefly about the Denver side of things?
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Kyler. My name is Mike Salisbury. I work in the City of Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency. So to dive right in, the funding, which I think is a really important question people have, we were very lucky in the City of Denver. In 2020, Denver voters passed a sales tax measure that dedicated revenue to support the work of the office I work in, Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency. And there were 6 allowable uses that you can see spelled out on the screen, sustainable transportation being one of them. So that passed in late 2020. And then we started working in 2021 to start thinking about what this program might look like. We had really good feedback from the community in 2020 about what the priorities of the Climate Protection Fund should be. And so an e-bike incentive, e-bike rebate program was one of those top recommendations from the task force that was making recommendations to our office. So that's just been really critical for us. So we have a dedicated revenue source. Part of that goes to transportation. So that gave the city the resources to offer incentives like this program. Next slide, Carla. So just like a couple points is on the bird's eye slide, talked about the incentive amount. So it's $400 for all Denver residents, up to $1,200 for income qualified Denver residents. And then there's an additional $500 adder for e-cargo bikes. And I think how we kind of decided on those levels was we're really trying to looked at incentive programs across the country, kind of looked at some of the higher level incentive amounts were, and also looked at the e-bike inventory in the city of Denver at that time and kind of wanted to target that general incentive to be for the least expensive bikes in kind of 25% of the bike cost range. And then for the income qualified side, have that be about 75% of the cost of the bike. And what's really been interesting over the last 6 plus months since the program has launched is we have seen a lot more lower cost e-bikes come into the program. So that's kind of brought that average price down. The impact of the rebate has, I think, gotten bigger. So I think just one other thing I wanted to throw out is that one aspect of the program is Denver's incentive is an upfront rebate. That we knew, I think, as we designed the program, that was really important to us to make sure that that incentive came up front, because we've gotten feedback, especially in that income qualified space, that that was just not a cost that people were able to front for however long it took the city to reimburse them for that check. So it was really important for us to make that upfront incentive. And one component of that meant that we have to work really closely with the participating bike shops. So we worked really close with them to make sure that they were going to be happy and comfortable being a part of the process and kind of accepting that rebate. And they would be the ones to essentially bear that cost for until the city was able to reimburse them. Because that was just really critical to us to make sure that they were on board, they were happy with the process from day one. And next slide, Tyler. So I think, hopefully, it's been an amazingly successful program. We've had over 4,500 people redeem vouchers to date. And we then have seen demand far, far exceed our supply. We're going to end up probably at the end of the year spending close to $5 million over the course of 7 to 8 months on this program. There's a question in the chat about if we had sufficient revenue, what would the demand be? I don't know that exists. We have right now, we've given out a set of over 4,500 rebates. We still have about 20,000 people on our list of people who get emails from us about the program who are interested in getting vouchers in the future. So I don't know that there literally is, as much money as we think we have, it's not enough to fund the interest in the program right now. So really good problem to have, but definitely has just shown there's a huge amount of demand for the program from Denver residents. So I will pause there and look forward to more questions.
Mike, thank you for the overview. Looking forward to hearing more in a minute. Patrick, can I pass you the mic?
Great, thanks, Kyler. So state of Vermont in 2021, the legislature authorized just $50,000. So not quite the scale of what Denver was able to get for their program. $50,000 and no administrative funding allowed. That delayed the launch of our statewide e-bike program by a year. But we were able to bring on board the Center for Sustainable Energy that runs a few of our other incentive programs, and they helped to set up our e-bike program with another $50,000 from this past legislative session, and the ability to use some of those funds for administrative costs and to design the program. We did have the benefit of existing relationships with local bike shops because of many of our utilities, our local utilities also have incentive programs, and so that provided some infrastructure to build upon. So like Denver's program, we thought it was important to provide those point of sale incentives at the local shops. We have about 15 or 16 shops that participated in the program. And that was utilized by about a fifth of the total number of applicants. We also learning from a local incentive program through Burlington Electric Department, which was launched back in 2018. that there was definitely interest in online purchases because of the potential for reduced costs, bikes that could be had at $2,000 or less versus some of the other e-cargo bikes that might cost upwards of $3,000 or $4,000. So we did feel it was important to be able to provide that post-sale rebate in the case that people were able to find cheaper options online. As with all of our vehicle incentive programs, this was targeting higher incentives to those with lower incomes. So the initial authorization that came in 2021 established guidelines in the legislation that just provided a $200 incentive for anyone who qualified for our electric vehicle incentives. We then were able to get a little bit more flexibility in how we designed the program, and instead created a higher incentive, so $400 for those with lower incomes, and then $250 for those with sort of the moderate income category. And then it was also important for us to make sure that people with mobility issues were able to also participate in the program. And so I think as you all, as some of you just, are designing your own programs to think about how trikes and other sort of adaptive bike models might be allowed for reimbursement, rebate, or point of sale incentive. The results were that 56, over half our recipients came from those households with lower incomes, and like Denver, actually 68% of the funding, the total funding, went towards those households. So next slide, please. This is a dashboard that you can find on the website that hosts our information about the e-bike program. We feel it's important in terms of public transparency to see how the benefits are being distributed to Vermont residents. But I think it's also important for us to be able to learn from what has resulted from our program design and be able to incorporate that into future program design. So we ran out of $100,000 or so within less than 2 months. It was a one-time fund that was set up with the legislature. So we'll be going back this year to ask for much more, not $5 million, but much more than the $100,000 that we began with, and hopefully some flexibility to build upon the program design that we have. Next slide, please. So as I said, we were lucky to have infrastructure in place to build a program fairly quickly once we had the Center for Sustainability, for Sustainable Energy on board. And so we have at least 4 local utilities that already offer utility incentives. We have partnerships with a couple of our local credit unions that offer lower cost financing, which I think is a big part of what's required to get more bikes out to people with lower incomes. We had a lot of local advocacy and lessons that we were able to learn from those local incentive programs. We also have, even though funding is run out for our e-bike program, we have an incentive program called Replace Your Ride, which allows for someone to come and trade in an older gas vehicle, have that scrapped, and have a pathway to apply a $3,000 incentive towards e-bikes. It could be a traditional, conventional bike. It could be a combination of a number of different things that includes bikes and bike safety equipment. So that still remains an option, and that's funded at over $4.5 million. And then we have all kinds of nonprofit organizations that help with education and outreach and really provide support for the e-bike lending libraries, which has always generated much more interest. Once people have had the chance to actually ride on an e-bike, there's a pretty high conversion rate after that. And then of course, central to all of this is the infrastructure, particularly in a rural place like Vermont. We need to be able to ensure that these bikes can help to actually be used in rural suburban places by building out more complete streets, active transportation infrastructure, whether it's bike lanes and pedestrian space. So the state has been doing a better job of the several past years to incorporate more bike and pedestrian planning into our projects. Next slide. And so lastly, I just throw out a couple of things that we're thinking about as we move to the legislative session next year and ask for more funding generally to be able to provide some continuity to the program, to learn more from what the real demand might be. And we'll be analyzing results from a post-rebate consumer survey to understand what is the real potential for a place like Vermont in being able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Toward that end, I think we'll look at potentially increasing the incentive for cargo bikes, which is something that Denver obviously has done and makes sense from a greenhouse gas reduction potential. And we may also look at expanding our incentive program to commercial applications, municipal and nonprofit fleets, to be able to drive up adoption and actually replace car miles traveled. So, and lastly, we're looking at whether or not to include conversion kits or e-bike conversions. There would have to be some pretty strong parameters around that to ensure the safety, the roadworthiness of the bikes themselves. But we think that might have the potential to further increase the number of people who are able to participate in this program. And then we have some questions around how we define e-bikes in the state of Vermont as elsewhere. There is the 750 watt motor limit, and for some e-cargo bikes that's exceeded, and so those models are excluded. And then we'll have to look at possibly some price caps to ensure that people aren't using these incentives to buy outrageously expensive bikes, $7,000-8,000, where a $250 incentive isn't really making that decision possible. So look forward to hearing feedback and suggestions and questions that people in the audience might have about this. Thanks so much.
Great, Patrick, Mike, Kate, thank you very much for that overview. We are going to go now into a few prepared questions that we have. But I will also direct the panelists to the Q&A feature. There are a few questions that'll be easier to just type in responses rather than address live, particularly on the Vermont program. So while I'm stopping my screen share and pulling up the list of questions, just wanted to point you all there too. So, and please, we have these, as you all know, tagged to specific panelists, but if, you just gotta add something, please do. There's no need to stick to so much of a formal script on this one. So the first one, and there's a similar question in the Q&A that we received about this, is for Kate. What advice would you give to an advocate or city staffer who's looking to start an e-bike program in their town or state? And particularly, to kind of tag to the question in the Q&A, sort of what did you find to be some of the most compelling arguments as you were working with public officials as an advocate?
Absolutely. So I would say first off the bat that leadership is a collective. And so to really look at all of the potential partners for these efforts in your community. It goes beyond just a transportation thing, it's environment, equity, it touches a lot of different spaces. I would say what worked really well was leveraging social media to get people excited and to empower citizen activism. We all have metropolitan planning organizations that do a lot of transportation oversight in your communities. So that's another avenue for connection. One of the key pieces that I found was leading from real data. And so throughout the entire process, and it's now become a habit that I can't break, but I keep all of the current research on electric bikes and their implementation in various ways. I found that being able to give legislators or the decision makers really strong talking points supported by data on health benefits, air quality benefits, economic and equity was really helpful. And then the other thing is supporting local retailers. I think a lot of people on this call will, especially if you're a bike shop owner, you're working with limited resources and not always a lot of people. So it's hard to pull someone out to be able to get involved in the legislative effort. We picked a few bike shops and we really made sure to create situations where they could be successful in advocacy by, giving them as much information as they needed, helping them with, writing and getting signed up to testify online. And I think those are the main ones.
Stellar, thank you. This next one's going over to Mike. You talked a bit about the tiered rebates amount by income, and I just wanted to ask, what have you learned so far about providing these incentives to low-income communities, and what do you think that audience members who may be on the front end of designing a program should take extra care to consider in that space?
Great, thanks, Kyler. It's a really good question. I think we've been really, happy with the uptake among lower income Denver residents, but I think that we are always trying to figure out how to do even more in that space. So Patrick was talking about the e-bike lending libraries, like that being a really good, important entry point, because I think that there's still a lot of education work that needs to happen, especially in our kind of under-resourced communities. We can't just assume that they know what an e-bike is and that they're going to be excited about our incentive just because we put it on our website. I think there's a lot of work we're trying to do to get more of those e-bike libraries out in the community, do more events with participating with bike shops in the communities to make sure that people understand, how the voucher can help them, because I think there is also, just because we have these voucher levels and we think, hey, they can get a really great deal on an e-bike, but we can't assume that the first time that someone Googles Denver e-bike, that they're not going to pull up the $3,000 to $4,000 as their first search result, and then they're going to be like, well, I can't afford that even with a $1,200 voucher. So I think there's a lot of just work in that space to make sure that people who don't live and breathe e-bikes every day are kind of given that basic information about how the rebate can be used by them, and then kind of what an e-bike is. Because Patrick was saying, getting on an e-bike is a great way to get people to understand what it is and how it can have that really positive impact in their life. So I think it's outreach, and then more outreach to really kind of get to those under-resourced communities.
Thank you. Definitely building off of what Kate said about coming as a sort of diverse and robust community to the table, and then continuing those relationships. Patrick, I have a sort of different type of question for you, less about the incentive itself and more about, it's one thing to help someone get a bike. It's another thing to make sure that they can ride it safely for their day-to-day life and needs. How has the popularity of incentives in Vermont led into conversations about the need for better infrastructure and the other things that go into a better holistic biking experience rather than just acquiring the bike itself? I know you touched on it, but I wanted to invite you to go into a little more detail if you'd like.
Sure. So I think those two conversations have happened in parallel. And I expect that as more and more people who maybe haven't used conventional bikes as their primary means of transportation, as they are able to access e-bikes and take up a larger share of their trips by e-bike, that will have more people involved in conversations around infrastructure that's needed in their communities. But it's certainly something that VTrans, the Vermont Agency of Transportation, has been continuing to work on, as making sure that all projects are now considering complete streets designs, and that they're incorporating the kinds of infrastructure that we need for all modes of transportation. So it's I do think that the increased adoption of e-bikes will help to further push on those kinds of initiatives.
Okay, great. And of course, PeopleForBikes is wanted everything we can to help make sure that that infrastructure keeps getting built. This next one is the combo question for Mike and Patrick, as the programs that have been rolled out, and actually, the funding has been spoken for. But Kate, please do jump in as well. It's a question around, given how quickly the funds have been spent down, for audience members who are on the front side of a process like this, how would you recommend factoring this potential for very high demand before the program launches? And is there anything that, knowing what you know now, you might have done differently sort of when you were, to the extent that you were involved in that conversation about dollar amounts, total or of individual incentives, given how quickly the funds have been spent?
That's a really hard one. We honestly started the program launch in April. We originally had budgeted about $300,000 to spend in 2022. So don't ask me about how to budget for this program. It's been a roller coaster ride of, oh my God, there's way more demand. After the first weekend of it being launched, we're like, oh boy, we've got a really good problem here. I think I would reiterate, I think, certainly at the incentive levels that we're offering in Denver, I think there's a lot of demand. So there's way more demand than we can possibly have funding for in Denver. And so I think it's really hard to figure out a way to budget for that, because you're always going to have lots of very unhappy people in this situation. So that's been real challenging, but I think trying to figure out, and one thing we're working on is trying to figure out more equitable ways to give people access to the vouchers, because we have had a first come, first served model in Denver where Monday morning, people go online and try to claim a voucher. And that's been okay, but it's been very frustrating for people. And also, not everyone can be in front of their computer at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. So trying to figure out ways to make the program more equitable so that, more people have an opportunity to get a chance at a voucher. So I don't have any answers. I just say it's a very challenging space when e-bikes are so popular.
Yeah, even with the sort of lower incentive funding that Vermont offered, we still saw, and thanks to Denver, we expected to see a quick run on the incentive pool that we had. We are at the mercy of the legislature and what their decisions are around funding. So there's not much that we could have, I think, done differently. I think, other than argue for more funding. And I think the legislature needed to see how quickly it would run out to get a sense of what the demand might be. So I think that this kind of leads into other questions that have been asked in the chat around, the participation of local retail shops as an example. If you have only a small bit of funding that's then quickly running out, you don't really have time to get into sort of a streamlined way of running the program. So it will result in kind of lag times and reimbursing the retail shops. If you don't have all those systems up and running smoothly for a longer period of time, it doesn't allow for all bike shops across the state to necessarily participate. It takes more time for people to come on board and be able to make sure that agreements are in place and work out those initial kinks in whatever system is developed. So I think being able to have enough funding to have a run for at least a year to be able to then keep things running smoothly and be able to go back to whoever your authorizing legislature is, and be able to put in place the amount of funding that you really do need is important.
And then I would just jump in to say, I think my biggest regret about our advocacy piece in Connecticut is that we put too low of a cap on the price of the bike. And so after watching, Denver really focus on the car replacing cargo bikes, I think that that's going to be a struggle in Connecticut. We have a cap of $3,000 to be able to get people out onto cargo bikes. There's limited retailers who have them at that price point or below. And so if I could do it again, it would be much higher.
Great. Thank you all. And Kate, I'm going to ask you to take us home on this final question, maybe building off what you just said, but from the advocacy side, what were some of the biggest surprises or challenges that you experienced in getting this program to fruition?
I think one of the biggest surprises is that you have to build those relationships and networks with environmental groups. I think as we saw at a federal level where the e-bike bill kind of stalled, was without that buy-in and environmental groups seeing e-bikes as a true emissions reducing car replacing tool in the toolkit that we're all going to share, you're missing out on a huge force of advocacy. And so I talked earlier about the importance of getting people on bikes. And I think that can't just be limited to legislators. I think you have to create opportunities for these other silos of advocacy to get on bikes too. So if that means doing an e-bike demo for nonprofits, then you're going to need to do an e-bike demo for nonprofits. And then the only other thing I would say is, it's an interesting juxtaposition being kind of in between two pre-existing groups. But from the advocacy perspective, I think it's important to build in some gentle watchdogging. And I say that knowing that at least two people from the Connecticut program are on today, but supporting. And so if there is cutting edge research that's come out about something, taking up space and making sure you're getting that to them. That's it.
Super, thank you. All right, so we now enter the sort of free-for-all portion of the call. And thank you. We received many questions in the Q&A. Apologies, we're probably not going to be able to get to all of them individually, but you'll have our panelists' emails on the screen and in the in a few minutes, and then in the slides that you'll be sent afterwards. So please do keep the conversation going in case we don't get to your question in the next 15 minutes or so. But this first one, there's a great question from Elizabeth that I'm going to reword a little bit to say, particularly for Patrick and Mike, what sort of concerns did you hear from retailers that they wanted to make this program as administratively easy on their end as possible? We think a lot about the recipient, the customer of the incentive, but of course the retailers are a critical piece in making that happen. And I think lots of folks are thinking about sort of what is the balance between like whose needs get prioritized where. So if you could talk about any kind of debates or decisions you had to make are making sure that retailers are having a smooth experience, that would be great.
And start off, I think that one of our, programmatic North Stars was keeping things as simple as humanly and bureaucratically possible, both for the individuals and the retailers. I think that, again, we really had to engage the retailers and make sure that we're not going to give them a 10-page form to fill out every time they process an e-bike, because their staff is very busy and don't have time. So we tried to make, when the retailer goes and someone, customers in their shop, need to essentially just put in some very basic information. There's a voucher number, there's the person's name, the type of bike, bike serial number, and just very basic information, the price of the bike. that they need to be able to input every time they process the bike. We really, limited the fields as much as possible, knowing that the staff there, just does not have the capacity to, fill out a lot of paperwork for every single one. And then again, trying to make sure on the back end that, when we worked with bringing on a contract administrator to process the relays for us, during our process of bringing them on, we made it very clear to them that these refunds back to the bike shops need to be going back in like a 2-week period. At a minute, that's kind of the lower end of what they're asking for. They do not, even these are lots of their small bike shops. Maybe they can sit on a few vouchers, but for like a month, sitting on like 50 worth of vouchers, it's a lot of money for them to front. So it has to be a very fast turnaround. We made sure that was part of our process, and we brought on someone to help us process rebates.
I think, one of the things is just to involve bike shops from the beginning in the design of the programs. So that's certainly what we did. There were a number of advocates that helped create the political will to actually, approve this in the legislature. And we brought those folks in along with a number of bike shop owners and managers to be able to make sure that we receive their input on how the process would work. And then we went back before launch to make sure that everybody understood how things were going to flow. And so I think that was important to do, knowing that there would be a lot of interest right off the bat. And as Mike has said, making sure that the application process was as easy as possible, both for the applicants, so that we didn't go through a whole process by which we'd have to verify income. We had to just, we're in Vermont, so we trust people. We had to put in place basically a income attestation that this person attests that they qualify under this income bracket. And what we'll do is kind of a post program audit of just a few to make sure that in fact the money went to the people who were eligible. And we've done that in our other programs and haven't found issues, so I'm not expecting any significant issues here, but things like that you can kind of take out of the process that would make it difficult either for the consumer or for the bike shop owner, I think is important. So yeah, and we're always taking feedback from bike shop owners as we go.
Thanks, Patrick and Mike. I'm going to combine a few different questions, and then panelists, I'll see if there's any of your eye on to answer that we haven't gotten to yet. After this, we can elevate those. But again, probably more for Mike and Patrick. There's a few questions around the data tracking side. I think you both mentioned that you're sort of starting to roll out these post-consumer surveys. There's questions around sort of what are the demographics of people who are buying these bikes? To what extent can we tell that they're replacing car trips? And the one question around sort of, is there any tracking we can do to mitigate the fear that someone might just be reselling the e-bike and pocketing the incentive, which I know this is related to the sort of tracking and data collection side. So could you just talk maybe in some more detail around how each of your programs are approaching that?
Yeah, Kyler, great question. Probably one of the most common questions we get is, what are the GHG benefits? How do you know people are actually riding bikes? So that's been something I apologize, we're about 2 weeks out. We have just put a survey out to about the first 3,000 people who have redeemed their vouchers, and are collecting responses to that survey right now to try to answer all of those questions. So if you ask me in about 2 weeks, we'll have gone through all this data and I think have a much better sense of how people are using the bikes, all of those demographic questions, how many car trips they're replacing. I'll tease preliminarily looking at the data because I can't bear to wait. it's like, I think it's a very positive story as far as people are really using the bikes. They're getting out there, they're replacing car trips, multiple car trips a week. So we're really excited, and we'll have a lot more details about that. But yeah, I think we're also hoping to, the National Renewable Energy Lab has a has an app that we're hoping to partner with them to get people who are part of the program to participate, use this app to kind of get you more fine-grained data, because surveys are great, but they're not, it's a point snapshot in time. So we are trying to think if there are ways we can actually do like real live trip tracking through NREL to get real data from how people are using the bikes. I think that's obviously even more valuable and gives us a much better sense of than a survey can about how the bikes are being used.
And I'd love to be able to do the same with our participants, especially as we've just today are experiencing the first snow in Vermont. We launched a program in the summer when everybody's looking to hop on a bike. And so it would be interesting to see how patterns also vary seasonally. We're going to be looking at how things might vary geographically within the state based on sort of our more urban versus rural areas. And we'll be conducting a similar study within by the end of the year to be able to help inform our request to the legislature early next year. There was another piece to that question, Kyler, I think, about how do you prevent free ridership? We think that one of the biggest things to do is just to think about income eligibility. It's one thing to provide a rebate that will go to everyone, and it's very difficult then to be able to come back and say that this $400 maybe actually made the difference between a purchase or not. But we are more confident in saying that some of the purchases that are being made by our lower income households that qualify are being helped significantly by the amounts that we put in place. So I think just thinking about income eligibility as a key way to help prevent free ridership.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, and Mike, I apologize if you said this. Is there a place that in a few weeks, when you have more of that data, it'll be posted publicly so folks on the call can find some of those insights?
Hopefully. I don't know exactly what form we're going to publish this in. It might be start out with some infographic with kind of some of those really high level results and then kind of follow up with more details. But I will definitely share that with Kyler and anyone else who might be interested. I definitely want to get that information out there because a lot of people are very eager to understand the impacts of the program.
Yeah. All right, well, as we approach the last 5 or so minutes of the call, I wanted to see panelists, is there a question you've had your eye on that we haven't gotten to yet? And maybe I'll give Kate the first pass, given that we've been spending some time on Connecticut and Vermont.
There was a question that I had typed to one of the participants about qualifying bikes and making sure, I think, that you have a safe product out there on the road. Because Connecticut's program is still being built, I don't have exact data to point to like Mike and Patrick do. But one thing that they are contemplating is asking retailers, in particular online retailers, to register. So that way we know that the product is tied to a company that has support for after the purchase. I think we've all kind of seen in the news articles about fires, and upon a deeper dive into that, it looks like it is limited to a lower quality product. And so, we're being very mindful, I think, of making sure that consumers are safe with what they purchase and supported.
I just piggyback briefly. I think one thing that was really important for us was that all the bike shops that are in the local participating bike shops, they have to offer service on the bike. That was a requirement rush from kind of day one, because we definitely wanted to have someone be responsible if something goes wrong. Because a lot of bike shops will not touch an e-bike sold by somebody else, especially the battery and the motor. So having that local service option so people have a place to go if something happens to their bike, I think is just a really critical thing that we feel is really important.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, that's what we hope an e-bike program incentive program can be at its best, right? Helping people who don't otherwise have the means buy a quality bike with a quality battery pack instead of a $500 bike, out of financial necessity and the dangers that we've seen can come along with a lower quality product. So, and Patrick, I know that was to your point earlier about conversion kits. I wanted to make sure that if that happened as a sort of more accessible financial model for electrifying people's rides, it was within strong parameters of safety. Great. Well, any other ones? Maybe we'll take one more question. But if there's anyone that panelists that had their eye on, that would be, we can answer that one now. Or if not, I can have one more in mind. Great. Okay, well then let's close on one that I think is just going to be a popular one. Perhaps not the most interesting or exciting, but certainly important, just to speak more about the main sources of funding for your programs. I think that we touched on at the beginning, but I think that just having a little bit more embellishment around that will help people as they're trying to figure out where's the money going to come from. And we can take it in any order.
I'll jump in first. I was the fastest to unmute. So Connecticut, this will be nested within Connecticut's previously existing electric vehicle rebate program. We saw an opportunity to do this because we realized that program was not reaching low-income people at a level of adoption, and also that there was money left over. And so we thought there was a way to get more people into electric transportation and also at a price point that they were comfortable with.
I mean, again, Denver's funding comes from the Climate Protection Fund, which is a sales tax passed measure in 2020 that gives us, $40 million total office-wide for climate programs. And so transportation gets a piece of that, and then e-bikes a portion of that. But I think it's a great example of, we're really trying to make sure we're giving that money back to Denver residents. It's not just going to hey, let's, fund some stuff the city wants to do and is not directly benefiting residents.
For the state of Vermont, the funding has come from transportation funds, state transportation funds, and this past year from general funds. And that's where I imagine it will come from this coming year, if it does. We do have a financial issue here in Vermont, where the influx of federal funding has created some pressures on state funding to be able to match that federal funding. So that's something that we'll have to contend with. But I think I would stress that every jurisdiction, whether it be state or local, is a bit different, and there are always going to be different options that a government or advocacy organization can pursue, and it may be looking at local option taxes, a sales tax in the case of Denver. It might be a incremental increase on the fuels tax. There are different ways to put things together. There might be transportation demand management ordinances that put pressure on employees on employers and developers of housing on that tie requirements to parking requirements, so that you're able to provide sort of a regulatory mechanism for funding to go to residents or to employees. There are a number of different ways to do it. So I encourage you to kind of think creatively within your own jurisdictions of what's allowed, what's possible.
Exciting possibilities. Thank you all. I just want to make sure that we have a moment with our panelists' emails up on the screens. You can take a screenshot, jot it down. Of course, you'll get the slide deck later today or tomorrow once our recording is posted. We can send that to you as well. We hope that you found something valuable out of this morning. The fact that 80% of folks stuck around for a full hour means a lot, and we hope that it was a valuable conversation to you. I just want to quickly plug our next webinar. Like I said, we host these approximately once a month. It won't be about e-bike incentives, but we think you'll still hopefully find it useful. It's on December 8th at 10 o'clock, and it'll be part of a 3-part DEI focus series we're doing for the bike industry. This one all around sort of public communications and partnerships and how to make sure that, you as a company, but I think it could also be as a government program, a city office, are making sure that when you're working in the biking and mobility space, you're particularly with communities that have been historically excluded from the leading edge of that space, you're doing so in a way that uplifts and doesn't continue the oppressive histories that have defined a lot of the work that we do. So tune in on December 8th if you're interested. We'll have some fantastic panelists as well. But for today, Kate, Patrick, Mike, I can't thank you enough for your time. We're so glad you're here with us. And have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.